Hi class, this is Susan Priest, and this is the Part 1 Judaism lecture for World Religions at WNC, Philosophy 210. So we're going to be talking a little bit about ancient Mesopotamian religions and also ancient Judaism. So it's really important to know a little bit about ancient Mesopotamian history and religion before we jump into the beginnings of Judaism, because there's the next three religions that we're looking at, the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all have been influenced quite a great deal by the culture in ancient Mesopotamia and in Egypt. So here is a picture of a map that is a guesstimation of what the region looked like in ancient Mesopotamia, what's now known as the Middle East, around 2500 BCE. So a couple of things to make note of. So maybe you remember this from 7th grade social studies or something like that, seems to me. The birthplace of civilization taking place around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. So notice these city-states that are mentioned along the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, just due northwest of the Persian Gulf. So these city-states here are what would be the modern-day nation-state of Iraq. And to the east, in the Zagros Mountains, to the east would be the modern-day nation-state of Iran. At the time of 2500 BCE, there was no nation-states in the Arabian Desert. It was all just Bedouin tribes wandering around. So we don't have any city-states in the Arabian Desert, although around the Nile River, there is another ancient civilization. But we're really interested in the ancient Mesopotamian civilizations of Sumer and ancient Babylon. And you can see Syria here, which was ancient Assyria at the time. And then the mountains of Lebanon next to the Mediterranean Sea would be the place where the modern-day nation-state of Israel/Palestine are. So keep this in mind as we're looking at this beginnings of Judaism. So this may sound familiar. Around 4000 BCE, people began settling in the cities of the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. So why is this often called the birthplace of civilization? What must have been happening here? Those two rivers together provided a place for what previously had probably been hunter-gatherer societies into agricultural city-states, so people could settle down and grow crops. And as soon as people started to settle down and grow crops, they started to create more organized civilizations. Around 330 BCE was the first writing form invented, cuneiform, which was found at Uruk. And Uruk was one of the major cities along the Euphrates River. So this is relatively stable, this timing, and that's known from carbon dating. So the period between 3300 and 2300 were considered a time of, was called the pre-Babylonian period. And this was a period of time where Sumerian city-states occupied the area. And we know that there were, they celebrated the creation stories of Gilgamesh and Enuma Elish, which I will say more about in just a moment. And we know that they had, each city-state had their own god. So, Carson City would have its own god, Dayton would have its own god or goddess, Gardnerville, Reno. So if we look at the area that we're living in, if you can imagine that every different city had a different god or goddess. And there were temples built in each city to honor their gods and goddesses. So the thing that happened in 2300 BCE was that Emperor Sargon I conquers the Sumerian city-states and creates an empire. So this is the first major world power in this region. Okay, there's still Egypt, right? But so Sargon doesn't conquer Egypt, but he conquers all the city-states around the Tigris and Euphrates River and creates an empire. And from this time period until the present day, that region of the planet, the Middle East, has been probably the most fought over area of the world. Somewhere around 1800 BCE, scholars believe is the origins of Hammurabi's Code. And this becomes very interesting when we look at the development of Judaism, because Hammurabi's Code is in fact the instigator of the law of retaliation, which is called Lex Talionis, or as you might be familiar with it as an eye for an eye. So it's helpful to know some things about Mesopotamian religions because in contrast to India and China, where the cultures are relatively set aside from other peoples, in Mesopotamia, all these people had interaction with each other. So we know that in the origins stories of Judaism, which many of you might more likely recognize as the origin stories of Christianity, they're really being influenced by Mesopotamian religions. I'm not necessarily saying that they are Mesopotamian religions. I would say there was a conversation going, and we'll see why that is. So if this image on the left is actually an image of a priest. I know it looks like a woman, but it's a priest. So one thing you can see in a lot of ancient iconography of priests is there's kind of gender fluidity, if you will. So one of the things that was celebrated in ancient Mesopotamian religion was the proper manner of kingship. So the king would often have to reenact the sacred marriage with one of the temple prostitutes. I did mean that. Who would enact the sexual act to kind of confirm or bestow blessings upon the king so that the king would be able to produce children in his actual marriage. So as is common with many different ancient religions, indigenous traditions, there were festivals at the new year and at the different phases of the moon. Most cultures have New Year and moon celebrations. Also, like the Chinese, they practice a kind of divination where they're ascertaining the will of the gods through astrology and examining the organs of sacrificial animals. Now, in Chinese culture, they were using the book The I Ching for divination. Divination in the ancient Mesopotamian realm was more about looking at the organs of sacrificial animals. So if a lamb was killed, to look at the liver, possibly pancreas of the lamb that was slaughtered, and that would be those who were skilled in the means of divination would discern what was going to happen next from these organs. So this is the most common form of religion around the world throughout any culture, and that is intercessory prayer. So what does that mean? It means prayer said on behalf of someone else. So think about where religion becomes commonplace for a lot of people. If someone gets sick in your family and someone offers to pray for them, that is an example of intercessory prayer. So people would come to the temple in the city-states to ask the priest to pray for them or pray for someone in their family. The last theme, which is really interesting, is this idea that theodicy, so this is the question of why suffering exists in the world. Specifically, why do bad things happen to good people? No one seems to care if bad things happen to whomever they think is bad, but we rail at this idea that someone who has been just and fair in their life would actually continue to suffer. So one of the most famous biblical stories which takes on this question is the book of Job, Job. As it happens, there is an ancient Mesopotamian story of Job that predates the biblical story about a man called Job. And in the ancient Mesopotamian story, there is in fact a man who is honorable and who is tested by the gods, and he stays faithful. So one of the things that is we're using different archaeological explorations to help us have greater understanding about both ancient Mesopotamian religions, but also about the origins of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So most of these archaeological finds were found by British archaeologists at the end of the 19th century, so the end of the 1800s. This is where a lot of things happened. And then later on, using carbon dating technology, we kind of get a sense of the timing of some of these stones. So the Enuma Elish was a Babylonian creation epic, which talked about the hero Marduk, and the hero Marduk created the world by battling the demon sea monster Tiamat, who was feminine, and he slaughtered her, and her body created the firmament, which is the dome that between the heavens and the earth. The other major find was a story about an ancient king by the name of Gilgamesh, who went on a quest to seek immortality. And he learns of a flood story. So that's another interesting idea. But really, the thing that is so fascinating, which again dates back to the 18th century BCE, Hammurabi's Law Code, which is in the British Museum, I believe. It's actually, I can't remember if it's in the British Museum or the Louvre, to be honest with you right now as I'm recording this. True confessions. But it is this very tall black stone which shows King Hammurabi, who is sitting in his throne at the top of this black steel stone, and he's being given the law from the sun god Shamash, who was considered to be the protector of justice. And then detailed below are a whole system of rules for what happens when somebody does something wrong. So it created this idea of the law of retaliation, and it was a kind of a social ordering for ancient Babylon. It has close parallels with the Mosaic Code, but there's one significant difference. The Mosaic Code, the Ten Commandments, etc., was equally applied to people across their status, social status. But the Hammurabi's Law Code, the idea of an eye for an eye, would only be true if there were two people of the same status. So if a poor person stole from a poor person, they would lose their hand. If a rich person stole from a rich person, they would lose their hand. If a poor person stole from a rich person, they would lose their life. And if a rich person stole from a poor person, they would not lose a hand. So this unequal code of justice was the law of the land in ancient Mesopotamia. So now we're going to switch over to the start of Judaism. Okay, so this is I really like this, and I think this phrase that Houston Smith uses, that the Jews are people in search of meaning, is really important. They want to know why things happen, why things are the way they are. So they're always asking the question, why? Why did this happen this way? Why is God doing this? So they weren't content to just sort of say, oh, this is the way it is, and move forward. They were always looking for deeper meaning. So the starting place, in some sense, is the Hebrew Bible. So in ancient Judaism, the letter and the Hebrew alphabet itself was sacred. This is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which is Aleph. The Hebrew Bible, which I want everyone to be aware of, should not be called the Old Testament at any time or place, because the Hebrew Bible, according to the Jewish people, is not an Old Testament. It is their testament. Okay? So you should know the proper terminology. And this is where you really have to keep asking yourself, why you see things the way you do, right? So the Hebrew Bible is divided into 3 parts. So the word Tanakh is a acronym for the 3 parts of the Bible. So the T stands for Torah, or the teachings. And the Torah are considered the first 5 books of the Bible, starting with Genesis. And they are in the same order: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, in the Hebrew scriptures, as well as all of the versions of the Christian Old Testament. And there are differences between Protestant and Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Old Testaments. So you should know that. But the first 5 books are the same in all versions. The N in Tanakh stands for the second division, which is the Nevi'im, which are called the prophetic books. And they include historical writings as well as the major and minor prophets. Now, here is where there's really a big difference in how, not necessarily the content of the books of the Bible. The content of the books of the Bible are the same in the Hebrew scriptures and Christian Old Testaments. But here, under the section of the Nevi'im, the ordering of the books becomes different. There's a different ordering of the books in the Bible if you look at the table of contents in a Tanakh and you look at the table of contents in an Old Testament. So just a shorthand piece of information about this. The Jewish rabbis thought that the best way to organize the books after the first 5 was to put them in order in which they were written down historically. They believed that those who were written down first historically were more accurate and more sacred. So some of the books that Christians view as prophets or prophetic, like the book of Daniel, or historical writings like 1st and 2nd Chronicles, the Jews do not consider prophetic or historical. They consider them part of the 3rd branch, which is the Ketuvim, the writings. So the K in the Tanakh stands for the Ketuvim. So the book of Daniel, which Christians consider to be prophetic, the Jews do not. 1st and 2nd Chronicles, which are seem to be recording historical events around the time of King David, the Jewish rabbis tell us, well, they do, but they were written 200, 300 years after the fact, so they don't think they're as trustworthy as 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, which are in fact documenting what is happening with King David while King David is alive. So this is I'm borrowing this terminology and the framing of this from Houston Smith. So this is really a unique feature of Judaism. All people are equal. Now, you might say men and women do not have the same status in ancient Judaism. However, women are people. And so they, in some sense, are also equal in the eyes of God. But the big thing in Judaism is there's no distinction between someone who's slave and someone who's free. And in the ancient world, probably 80% of the people were slaves. So this is kind of a big deal. I don't know if you can get your mind around that. It's hard for me to get my mind around the idea that in the ancient world, 70 to 80% of people were slaves. But according to the book of Genesis, human beings are made in the image of God, which means human beings are co-creators with God. It also means human beings are free. We're not moved around on puppet strings by the Almighty, but in fact are responsible for the choices that we make. So freedom means responsibility in this context. But humans are limited. Humans are frail and touched by sin. Now, let me be very clear here. Jewish scholars, Muslim scholars, Eastern Orthodox Christian scholars, and rabbis and ministers and priests do not believe in original sin, which was an idea created by St. Augustine of Hippo. So in Judaism, sin, or hamartia, meant missing the mark. And the idea here is the problem with people, and there is a problem, is we don't live up to our full potential. We tend to fall short. And that is a very distinctly different idea than human beings born sinful and evil because of the stain of Eve, which was Augustine's interpretation of Genesis. According to Judaism and the book of Genesis, humans are God's beloved children. So this is very different in contrast to the concept of gods in ancient Mesopotamia. So we can see that Judaism is always drawing itself in stark contrast against the religions of ancient Mesopotamia that they were pretty much in competition with. So the story of Judaism begins with Abraham, who is the first patriarch. So Abraham, the patriarch, who biblical scholars believe he probably lived around 1800 BCE. That's kind of going backwards from some very specific dates, which I'll talk about in a moment. But so around 1800 BCE, Abraham was living in the city of Ur, U-R, along the Euphrates River. And God came to him and said, Abram, you will be my beloved. He wanted to make a covenant with him. So God, Yahweh, came to Abraham and said, if you go to the land of Canaan, which is where modern day Israel, Palestine are, I will promise you that land as a covenant, and I will be your God, and you will have descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. Now, the only problem with this was at the time, and Abraham reportedly was like in his 80s or something like that, very old, and he did not have any children. So how is this going to happen? But he was promised land and babies. So he went, as it's told. And his wife Sarah had sent her maidservant Hagar to sleep with Abraham so that he could have a son, because she wasn't getting pregnant. So Hagar had bore Abraham's first son, whose name was Ishmael. And as it's told in the end of so soon afterwards, okay, here I'm going to, you'll see that I'm getting reminders to update my, sorry about that. So when Ishmael was like around 10 or 13, something like that, Sarah got pregnant with a second son, Isaac. And she said, so in this picture, I think it's a Caravaggio painting. In this picture, Sarah's in the background, and she has told Abraham, get rid of Hagar and Ishmael. You can see Ishmael crying, and Abraham is sending them off. And they actually end up in the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, and the Arab people say they are descendants of Ishmael. So here we have a kind of soap opera of the ancient world. So Muslims claim their destination from Ishmael, Jews claim their descendants from Isaac. So we have, but they're both sons of Abraham. They're both sons of Abraham. So the next thing that happens in the storyline, once Isaac becomes a teenager, according to the Hebrew scriptures, God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son. So now remember what the covenant is. The covenant is you're going to have descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. He's already sent away Ishmael, and now he's being told he has to kill his only son. Pretty big deal, right? So he is obedient, and that's something that people often stress as the most important part of this story. I'm going to suggest to you something else. And just as Abraham is about to kill Isaac, an angel of the Lord stays his hand and tells him to sacrifice an animal instead. A ram is sacrificed instead. Now, here's a very famous Caravaggio painting which shows what happens. You can see Isaac is not a little baby, and look at that face. Now, there's a lot of research, and I'm taking this from a certain dissertation by one of my former professors, Joe Milgram, who is a Jewish scholar and artist who did her doctoral dissertation on the art surrounding the binding of Isaac. And as uncovering the historical record, she found that, and this is substantiated in other places, that around that time period, it looked like there was a lot of human sacrifice going on. So this story may actually indicate a change from human sacrifice to animal sacrifice. So rather than just being about Abraham being obedient to God, it's also about a change in the sacrificial system. Hey, stop killing your kids, okay? And we know that killing innocent children and killing human beings is a practice that has been found across the planet in different places. And certainly, there's archaeological evidence in this region to suggest that there was a time period when human sacrifice was practiced. So who's next, right? So if we go through the lineage, we know that Isaac has two sons, Jacob and Esau. Esau is the first son. The second son, Jacob, becomes more important. Jacob gets renamed Israel later on and has 12 sons who become the 12 tribes of Israel. So in a long, complicated storyline, the descendants of Jacob, or Israel, end up in Egypt, and they become enslaved in Egypt. And then shows up on the scene Moses. So notice this is, some 600, 500, 600 years later in the storyline from our starting point with Abraham. And again, this is approximation of dating, moving back from a solid date that we can verify outside the biblical record. So Moses was born to Hebrew slaves in Egypt, but he was by special means spirited away by his sister and ended up being raised by the Pharaoh's daughter. So he ends up being born into a land of privilege. At some point, as he's an adult, he ends up killing an Egyptian slave master and has to flee the country. So when he is out of Egypt, he ends up, and he's in the wilderness, he talks to Yahweh, or God, in a burning bush, and Yahweh says, go back. You have to go back to Egypt, and you have to save my people. So he goes back and liberates the Hebrew slaves in Egypt after going through the plagues and terrible things. And then as the slaves leave Egypt, they're wandering in the desert for 40 years. And while Moses is in the desert again, he talks to God at Mount Sinai and ends up delivering the new covenant to the people, which are the 10 Commandments. So, just to be clear, the 10 Commandments are not originally a Christian document. They are a Jewish doctrine. So, just keep that in mind, all right? So, this the original covenant, one being God promising the descendants of Abraham this particular land. Another covenant modified later was to get circumcised. And then we have this latest covenant, which is, okay, I need to give you some more rules because you're messing up big time here. So there are 10 commandments. The first 4 are all about honoring God, and the next 6 are all about how human beings can maintain peaceful, organized societies together. Now, Miriam, Moses' sister, ends up being equally important in ancient Judaism as Moses, and this is documented in some extra-biblical texts, but Miriam was a great leader among the Jewish people as they're wandering in the desert. So another way that Jewish people interpret meaning or go in search of meaning is seeing that there is meaning in history. So this is new, because in ancient Mesopotamia, they're not tracking historical events as being meaningful. They're saying their God lives in a building in a city-state. But for Jewish people, it's historical events reveal the context of God, the manifestation of God in time, place, nature, personal experience. God shows up. And so God of the Jewish people is not God of place, not a God who is relegated to one city-state, but a God who transcends time and is related to people. So if God can show up in different times, then it actually matters what you do with your actions. Collective action is important. Every historical moment is a teaching moment where God might be revealing new things to you. And every time in history is unique. So notice this is in marked contrast to the concept of time that the Hindus have and the Buddhists have. The kind of more circular notion of time, things are repeating themselves. For the Jewish people, every time period is unique, and every time period could give you a new level of understanding of what God is requiring you to do. So after the time of Moses, we know that the Hebrew people wandered back up to the area known as the land of Canaan. And technically, Saul was the first king of the Jewish people. So again, around 200 years after the time of Moses. So again, we're working with approximations. So Saul is the first king of the Jewish people, but David becomes the most important king of the Jewish people. So around, and why is David so important? He unites the 12 tribes. Just imagine, this would be like Republicans and Democrats getting along with each other. Honestly. Can you imagine? It sounds so far-fetched. But that's the amazing thing that David did. When he united the 12 tribes, he organized and he made Israel, or it wasn't Israel, it's ancient, both Israel and Judah were united together. And he is really identified as the favorite king in Hebrew scriptures. There is another covenant with God made with David, and that is recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 11 through 16. And in this second covenant, there is in fact a mention that God promises that a descendant of King David will rule in Jerusalem. And the city of Jerusalem is located in the southern part of the kingdom, and that becomes important in a little bit. So it centers the kingdom in Jerusalem, and that is where King Solomon, who is the son of David, builds a temple around 950 BCE. Now, King Solomon, I'm going to just make this note here, King Solomon is the first king in the Hebrew scriptures who is also talked about outside of the Hebrew scriptures in some ancient Assyrian documents. And this is why this is the point at which biblical archaeologists and biblical historians look at the dating and say, this is why they move backwards from King Solomon. They move backwards and forwards. So actually, there's quite a bit in the Hebrew scriptures that document accurately events that were happening in this region. And we know this because these events were also talked about in documents outside the biblical record. So King Solomon built the first temple, and he also maintained unity among all the 12 tribes. But he died in 922 BCE. And when he died, the kingdoms divided. So they were only united for a very brief period of time. So the northern kingdom, which was larger, it comprised like 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom was the southern kingdom of Judah. The northern kingdom had more area and more tribes, but the southern kingdom of Judah had Jerusalem and had the temple. So what happens, we see, is that there's kind of two sets of storylines going on between the north and the south. And that's why there are a lot of stories in the Bible there's two different versions of them. And that comes from the records of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. So around 722 BCE, the Assyrian invasion happened. And the image that I have for you on the left is an image of an Assyrian warrior. The Assyrians were known to be very bloodthirsty, and they lived in their region of where they ruled from, which is where modern-day Syria is. It's just north of Israel, Palestine. So they came in to the northern kingdom, and the northern kingdom falls. And the Assyrians kill all the people, or they get assimilated. So this is the beginning of the stories of 10 tribes, the 10 tribes of Israel, which disappear or are assimilated. And we don't hear anything from them again, but it's the beginning of stories about 10 tribes disappearing. So consider, what would the southern tribe be thinking about when this happens, right? What would the southern tribe be thinking about? This isn't just a matter of identifying. We're not trying to memorize dates for the sake of memorizing dates. We're trying to understand what might, think about what might the people have been thinking about. They might have been thinking we might be next. And as it turns out, in the southern kingdom of Judah, about little less than 200 years later, the Babylonians, who again, the Babylonians were located where modern day nation state of Iraq is, came in and wiped out, destroyed the temple. They conquer the southern kingdom of Judah. They destroy the first temple. They don't kill people, but they take the priests and important figures were taken into exile in Babylon. So this is actually historically the beginning of the task of writing down the biblical stories in an organized fashion. So there were scrolls of important stories that were maintained in the temple, but this was the first time where we see the priests took it upon themselves to organize and write down the first 5 books of the Bible. Here is an image of the Babylonians taking the Jews into exile. So one of the things that we can see is, and I'm going to back this up for a second. We know that the Jewish people who were taken into exile, who started writing down the Bible stories in a more organized fashion and kind of editing things together, were very familiar with the Enuma Elish, the Gilgamesh epic, and Hammurabi's code. And they were clearly making distinctions between their understanding of their history and the history of the Mesopotamian people. So we see a kind of conversation happening in Genesis between the Jewish priests, and we're like, no, our God doesn't work like that. Our God doesn't slaughter a sea monster. Our God creates the world in an organized fashion in 7 days and nights, just by using his word. So the Jews were in exile in ancient Babylon until the Persian king Cyrus. So the Persia is modern day nation state of Iran, was ancient Persia. So King Cyrus came in and he conquered Babylon, and what he did is he says, okay, you Jewish people, you can go back to your country. You're no longer captives in Babylon. You can't have your own government, but you can rebuild your temple. So you might think that the Hebrew people were more positively disposed to the ideas of Persia as opposed to the ideas of Babylon. In fact, King Cyrus was called the Messiah by the Jewish people in the book of Isaiah. So the second temple was dedicated 515, and from 515 to 70 CE is known as the Second Temple period in Judaism. So I know this is a lot of facts and figures, but I want you to know this region. It's really important to understand the history of conquest so that we can see all the different cultural influences. So after the Persian lost power, they were conquered by Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, famous Greek ruler who was a student of Aristotle. And Alexander the Great conquers the Persian Empire around 330 BCE. And Greek influence is so strong in this region that there happen to be, all of a sudden, a lot of Jewish people who are speaking Greek and not Hebrew, which gives rise to the occasion for the very first translation of the biblical text from Hebrew into Greek. And the Greek version of the Hebrew scriptures is called the Septuagint. The Septuagint, the Greek version of the Hebrew scriptures, becomes the basis for the first Roman Catholic Old Testament. So from 539 to 167 BCE, Jews live in Jerusalem, but they don't have power over themselves. There's always a foreigner who's ruling over Jerusalem, which doesn't follow the Davidic covenant that was issued in 2 Samuel. So what happens in 167? There's a particular nasty general by the name of Antiochus IV who comes into the temple in Jerusalem, and he puts a picture of Zeus up and a slab of pork. And this just really pisses the Jews off. Excuse my French. So the Maccabees stage a revolt, and they win back Jerusalem. And this is the origins of Hanukkah. 8 Crazy Days and Nights is actually the story of the Maccabeans who only had enough oil to last for one day, and it lasts for 8, which allows them to win back the temple and win back Jerusalem. So you might be thinking about who's next. So between 167 and 63, there's actually Jewish rule of Jerusalem. So there's been Jewish rule of Jerusalem from the time of King Saul, 1020 to 539, and then not again until 167, until 63 BCE, when the Romans come in, and then not again until 1945. Think of that. So this is the last slide, and I'm kind of going through this quickly, but really I want you to see all of the different influencing ideas that come into play in this region, which have a lot to do with the origin stories and the development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So Zoroastrianism was actually a Persian religion. So remember, the Persians were from the area which we think of today as Iran. And the Persians, one of the religions of Persia, there were more than one, but one of the religions of Persia was Zoroastrianism. And Zoroastrianism was founded around 650 BCE by a man by the name of Zarathustra, who had a vision. This is an image on the left of a Zoroastrian priest. So Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, had a vision of the good god, Ahura Mazda. And the Ahura Mazda was the origins of everything that was good. And he came back and he wanted to tell the people who were basically polytheistic and he tried to tell them, look, there's only one God, and his name is Ahura Mazda, so get with the program. And you can imagine they didn't go for it altogether. So the basic storyline of Zoroastrianism, which we see begins to have an influence on some of the stories that develop in ancient Judaism and some of the beginning stories of Christianity. And that is that there is a good god, Ahura Mazda, who is always fighting the evil forces of a lesser deity by the name of Angra Manu. So evil only comes from Angra Manu. Evil cannot come from the good God. They also, in Zoroastrianism, have a belief that there will be a final battle between good and evil. And the final battle will culminate in, Guess who wins the final battle? Ahura Mazda or Angra Mainyu? You should answer quickly, Ahura Mazda. And so there is a belief here in a final judgment. In Zoroastrianism, there is this idea that when people die, they're judged for their actions and either sent to heaven or hell. And then at the end of time, Ahura Mazda will save everyone. There's no such thing in Zoroastrianism as eternal damnation. So we see the beginnings of this idea of apocalypsis and an apocalyptic end of time. So this is my end of Judaism, part 1.